No, I'm not kidding. You can draw absolutely anything by following 2 steps. And to prove it, I'm gonna draw 2 things I've never drawn before for this video. A clownfish and a frog. The first thing you want to do is observe. You don't want to observe the contours as if you're gonna trace. You have to observe in a way that leads to the second step, which is simplifying. You're basically doing both steps at the same time. So for the clownfish, you may get overwhelmed if you look at all the details like the stripes and the shape of its fins, but that's not what you're supposed to be looking for. You're supposed to be looking for basic shapes. You may be thinking of triangles, circles, and squares, and those are fine shapes to look for, but as an artist, I suggest you look for circles and ovals, orange slices, and boxes. Yes, orange slices. It is actually going to be one of the most versatile and useful shapes in your arsenal. Think of it like a triangle with rounded corners. Of course, you don't need to use these shapes specifically. There's no wrong shapes to use, but these are really good shapes to think of when simplifying. I think you'll get it when I demonstrate. So we have our clownfish. The best way to draw in general, but specifically to simplify, is to start big and get smaller and more detailed as you go along. You want to get things like proportions and size right at this stage, which is something that's really hard to correct if you get it wrong at the start, and even hard to get right when you start very detailed or zoomed in. So zoom out and think, what's the biggest and simplest shape that encompasses most of this figure? I think an oval-like shape for the body and a triangle-like shape for the tail. Notice how they aren't quite basic shapes? I'm still trying to approximate my shapes to the contours of the figure, but I'm not worrying about it too much. And by it, I mean the contours of the figure. As long as the body shape is the right size, and the tail shape is roughly in the same position and the same size as the tail in the reference, we can proceed to the next round of shapes. I'm going to add a couple of orange slice shapes for the fins, of course making sure to put them in the correct position, and make sure they are of around the same size as the reference. And now you can start to use guidelines to sort of measure where things should be. A good way of measuring is to use negative space. Don't just look at what's literally there. Look at the gaps between the fins, and use that to ensure that everything is positioned correctly. Look at the shapes the negative spaces create, and make sure that you have something similar. Looking at things literally would be to think that this fin goes roughly 1/3 above the bottom of the body, but really observing and using negative shapes means that yes, it is in this bottom third of the body, but it also creates a gap with this irregular shape. When drawing faces, negative shapes help so much to get proportions right. The next time you're drawing a face, don't just focus on where the eyes and nose are, but also how this little triangle shape looks. Observing is a skill you have to develop. It's kind of like assembling a puzzle, but instead of putting the pieces together, you have to find the pieces. So, back to the clownfish. We have all our basic shapes. Now we can use guidelines to follow the planes of the figure and keeping in mind what we just learned about negative space to add big details. I'm also sort of using these plane guidelines as a base for the shading I'll be doing later. If you don't know what planes are, look at the famous Isaro head. They're these little squares. Of course, a real human head is a lot softer than this, but as an artist, it will be extremely helpful to try and see everything in a simplified way. The planes are areas to turn away or towards the light, creating different values. And planes are just another way of simplifying. Instead of seeing things in gradients, try to see them as 2 values. So I put them my guidelines and I added the eyes and stripes. Isn't that crazy? We went from an oval and a triangle to a fish in basically 3 steps. But that was only possible because we observed really well and drew with purpose. A good rule to follow is to never draw quicker than you can think. Now, this video is called How to Draw Anything, not how to color and render everything, so I'm gonna sort of speed up this part. I will be making a video in the future about coloring and rendering, so subscribe if you want to see that. Now, for a second demonstration. We have a wizard frog. How would you simplify him? For the body, there's a lot of details, but I think a trapezoid-like shape is a good starting off point. The hat is a straight-up triangle with an oval for the brim, and the wings are 2 orange slices. Now for the second round of simplification, I'll do more orange slices for the limbs and a smaller trapezoid for the head. Now it's time once again to do guidelines thinking about... Did you forget? Negative spaces and planes, of course. Try your best to think in 3D when placing your guidelines, like how this little forehead ridge sort of wraps around the head at an angle since the frog is facing away from us, and how its little mouth does the same. It's not just a curved line, it's curving away from us. So even if you're not going to draw it going around the mouth because we can't see that, try to visualize it. And now before you know it, you did it! You drew yet another thing you've never drawn before with ease. This method is a good foundation to begin with because of course the more you draw something, the more techniques you'll develop to draw it better and faster. There's certain things you can draw that have shortcuts like drawing breaks and zigzags, but those are things you figure out with experience. Simplification and observation is the basis from which all art is created. So use these tools to draw anything. Thanks for watching till the end, and please subscribe if you got any value from this video. See you in the next one.